Welcome. Here's what's coming up in the moment. FAC allocation to the federal government, state and local government councils increased by 23.56% to 10.14 trillion in 2023. This is according to the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative's quarterly review. Plus, the federal government says progress is being made to maximize the full potential of eastern seaport complexes. And finally, outside Nigeria, Japan's central bank raises cost of borrowing for the first time in 17 years as the key interest rate up by 0.1%. Of this and many more are what to expect on the show today. I am Frank Omalapen. This is Business Week. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Let's begin with the major stories that made headlines in the week. The federal government says progress is being made to maximize the full potential of eastern seaport complexes. The Minister of Marine and Blue Economy, Mr. Adegboyega Oyetola, gave insight into the ongoing efforts during an inauguration of projects and tour of seaports in Rivers State. Senior reporter Uche Okoro has more.
From the Port Harcourt International Airport, Mr. Adegboyega Oyetola headed for the Onne port. The newly completed 4.8-kilometer road is a link to new berths at the Federal Ocean Terminal in Onne. The minister described the project as a proof of government's determination to address all factors responsible for the underutilization of the port.
We're doing the modernization of the port. We want to be able to see our port competing with any port in the world. Most of the traffic, particularly cargo, that has been taken to neighboring countries is because we're here to do a lot of things in terms of infrastructure. The ports that we have are old and they need serious renewal. So that is part of what we're trying to do. That was why I said that we're looking at putting not less than about $1 billion investment to rehabilitate all the ports, to make them more efficient.
The road covers 2 container terminals and is expected to cater to almost 1,000 trucks per day. This is meant to translate to an increase in the speed and ease of doing business in Onne Port.
Increasing efficiency simply means increase in revenue, definitely, reducing cargo dwell time and ship waiting time. Increasing efficiency means automating our system, ensuring that we get that cargo which we have been losing to other neighboring countries.
Mr. Oyetola inaugurated 6 mooring boats to further enhance maritime safety and security.
Some time ago, I commissioned some boats in Lagos, Apapa particularly, and I told you that we're doing all of that to all the ports, in the Federation. The essence of that is to continue to increase the efficiency of our ports. And I must commend the concessionaire and the MPA for ensuring that this particular port is ISO certified. That's very important. We look forward to all the other ports achieving the same status.
From Onne, the minister led his delegation to inspect facilities at the MPA complex in Port Harcourt. He said government would continue to invest in port infrastructure and other initiatives to sustain improvement in the performance of the nation's seaports.
Meanwhile, amidst growing concerns, shippers and manufacturers are worried about the adverse effects of the exchange rate volatility, limited foreign exchange access, cumbersome clearance procedures contributing to increasing operational costs. They emphasize that the challenges are adversely affecting import, export, and the broader shipping ecosystem in the nation. TVC News correspondent Ifunanya Eze reports.
Despite government initiatives aimed at boosting exports, shippers are voicing opposition to regulatory obstacles at ports, including the imposition of a 40,000 naira fee per export container. They argue that these excessive charges undermine Nigeria's competitiveness in the global export market. The National Shippers Association of Nigeria echoes these concerns, highlighting obstacles in accessing foreign exchange, fluctuating exchange rates affecting duties, and erratic clearance procedures.
Implementation of policies. Who does the implementation of policies? For example, customs I got as an importer, as a shipper, I got a circular from Central Bank that the exchange rate on your phone should remain until the point of clearing. That means your duty should be calculated on that. But the question is custom doing that? The answer is no.
If we had stable pricing of bringing in our goods, we plan. But this time around, you've already planned for the amount of money you use in bringing in your raw material. It lands at the ports, and lo and behold, it is 3 times of what you have planned for. By the time you are arguing, the aspect of demurrage comes in.
Furthermore, they criticized the disorderly implementation of policy reforms such as forest liberalization, which, alongside the evolving role of the Central Bank of Nigeria, are complicating trade and manufacturing operations.
The value or the exchange rate used on Farm M goes through valuation approval by CBN. Why should, on arrival now, that another exchange rate be raised for the same transaction?
We still say that government must, as a matter of urgency, put in place an economic policy that will be workable, that will be respected by all stakeholders, especially as it relates to the port.
In a call to action, the association emphasizes the immediate need for a new port order to address these pressing issues.
And away from there, Federal Accounts Allocation Committee allocation to the federal government's 36 state and 774 local government areas increased by 23.56% to 10.14 trillion naira in 2023. Executive Secretary of the Nigeria Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, Dr. Ogbonnayawoji, reviews this in a report presented at the FAC Quarterly Review in Abuja. This is an increase of 1.94 trillion naira, 23.56% compared to the 8.20 trillion naira shared in 2022. A breakdown shows that federal government received 3.99 trillion naira, that's about 39.37% of the total share, while the 36 states received 3.58 trillion naira, making it 35.34%, and the 774 local government areas received 2.56 trillion naira. That's about 25.28% of the total allocation. And now the review attributed the increase to improved revenue remittances to the federal account due to the removal of the petrol subsidy and the floating of the exchange rate by the new administration. Elsewhere in the week, the Group Chief Executive Officer, Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, Mr. Mele Kyari, says the final investment decision on the Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline project will take place in December 2024. Mr. Kyari said this during a leadership dialogue section at the ongoing CERAWeek conference in Houston, U.S., tagged Multidimensional Energy Transition, Market, Climate, Technology, and Geopolitics. The group CEO is also advocating for a different approach towards attaining energy transition for the African continent. The NNPCL board said a differentiated approach became necessary as global economies continue to call for a transition to cleaner energy fuels. And CERAWeek is one of the largest energy conferences in the world, and it attracts global energy industry experts and other corporate and government leaders from around the world annually to Houston, U.S. for a week-long conversation on the future of energy.
There's an ongoing engagement and in very advanced stage at a FEED level to create a pipeline that will pass through 13 African countries into Morocco, then jump into Europe. What that will do will create integration among the African countries, a number of countries that do have gas resources, so that collaboration will enable them have access to those pipelines. And our estimate is to see a $25 billion project, clear line of sight around financing for that project.
25 billion.
21 billion for that line, and then the alternate route is to pass through the center of our country all the way through the Sahara into Algeria, then into Europe. And the reason is very clear, but it's practical. We do not have issues around availability of the gas resources, so it's there. And of course, we also understand that maybe a little slower, but surely much cheaper process of transporting gas across. The Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline is beyond planning. I think we hope to see FID by the end of the year, about $25 billion.
And outside Nigeria now, Japan's central bank has raised the cost of borrowing for the first time in 17 years. The Bank of Japan increased its key interest rate from minus 0.1% to a range of 0.1%. It comes as a wage jumped after consumer prices rose. In 2016, the bank cut the rate below zero in an attempt to stimulate the country's stagnating economy. The hike means that there are no longer any countries left with negative interest rates. The bank also abandoned a policy known as yield curve control, which saw it buying Japanese government bonds to control interest rates. YCC policy has been in place since 2016, but has been criticized by the extorting market by keeping long-term interest rates from rising. Well, those were some of the biggest stories in Business Week. And coming up in a moment after this break, our focus is on Nigeria's economic prospect as crude price surges to $86. What is the import of these for the nation's economy? That's our talking point next after this break. Please stay with us. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Let's get into our conversation for today. Nigeria's economic outlook has received a significant boost as crude oil prices have surged to $86 per barrel, marking a substantial increase from previous levels. This uptick in oil prices, driven supply constraints and increasing global demand, has injected a sense of optimism into Nigeria's economic landscape, offering hope amidst recent economic challenges. So, what promise does this improved outlook hold for Nigeria's fiscal side? Let's get talking now. I'm joined by the acting head Natural Resources and Climate Governance at Budget Foundation, Mr. Enebi Okalowa. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Okalowa. Let's get started with these. Crude oil prices have been rising in recent time. How much additional revenue could Nigeria generate with oil prices hovering around $86 per barrel?
Regarding the crude oil price, in recent years, I think from January, we've started seeing some gradual increases, though the occasional spikes in terms of crests and troughs. But the general trend since January has been an upward tick, an improvement or an increase in the price of crude oil. And reason being that there were a lot of supply concerns regarding crude oil. There are issues from last year. We had issues with the conflict between Israel and Palestine, and then that's coupled with issues with supply disruptions in the Red Sea, and then the Russia-Ukraine crisis that has escalated also. So these things have affected crude oil price. And most recently, we understand that OPEC cuts are going to be sustained into the second quarter, likely the third quarter of this year. So these have raised supply concerns regarding crude oil across the world and has helped in pushing the price upwards. Now, for Nigeria, well, higher crude oil prices are always good news for us because that means more revenue. However, how much of that revenue is translated to the country's coffers is a different story entirely. But in terms of the volume of or the revenue that Nigeria stands to make, and if we with our sustained production at the moment, yes, there will be a few additional, at least compared to January this year, maybe $3-4 in additional revenue per barrel for the country.
In the last 1 year, we have seen volatility in the oil market driven by geopolitical tensions. How long do you see the conflict in Ukraine impacting global oil market, and how do you think Nigeria can leverage on the current surge?
So it is kind of difficult to, I can't predict when the war will end. Nobody thought the war between Russia and Ukraine will last this long. I think it started in 2022, February, and we are over 2 years in the war right now, something that even the Russians thought would not last more than 6 weeks. So it's difficult to say that the war will end next month or next year or even next week. I can't really say that. However, the impact of the war is not, let's say, we can feel it. So recently, Ukraine attacked Russia's refineries, and that was one of the reasons that one of the issues that affected the price of crude oil upticking. Additional volatility to the crude oil market. They successfully attacked Russia's refineries, and that was that added to the volatility in the crude oil market, added to the issues of the Yemeni rebels who are attacking shipments in the Red Sea. All right, so these issues tend to affect the prices, and these are conflicts. So the Yemeni rebels are offshoots from the conflicts in Yemen, a kind of the conflict that has been ongoing there for about a couple of years now within Yemen, and also involving extra Yemeni entities, meaning other countries in the Middle East that have interest in what's going on in Yemen. Same thing with the issue in Russia and Ukraine. These are war-triggered volatilities, and they would continue to have impact on the crude oil markets. It's just the nature. Anything that happens in the Middle East will impact. There was a time when Iran threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, and that affected the price of crude oil. So the volatility is still there. But however, the overall trend is that there are supply concerns, and that is going to last up until the third quarter of this year, at least for now.
Well, the current rally of 86 US dollars is above the government's benchmark price of $77. Do you see this leading to a budget surplus, bearing in mind that the federal government is targeting about 18 trillion naira from oil revenue in 2024?
I don't see a budget surplus anytime soon, and I have reasons for that. All right, so the idea behind subsidy removal was to allow the country retain more revenue. Right now, we've heard from official government quarters that the subsidy is not completely gone. In fact, the government retains the right to influence or, let's say, cushion the supply of, in quotes, let me just rephrase that, to cushion the supply of petroleum in the country to ease economic issues. All right. And so we understand that subsidy has returned, and some claims say it's much more than it was before it was removed. All right. That being said, that means this revenue savings that we would have had from subsidy removal is no longer available. That is one. Looking at the budget of 18 trillion in revenue also, and then 28 trillion in spending, that was already in the deficit. And that budget was prepared with a benchmark of 800 naira to a dollar as the exchange rate, which currently is not the case. Today, the exchange rate is now 1,400. Thankfully, it has come down from 1,500, which it was a few days ago. As at yesterday, close of yesterday, it was somewhere 1,410 naira to a dollar. So that means the value, our revenue in terms of its real value has dropped, and the cost of expenditure has risen, which means that the budget deficit has widened. All right. I don't know. I am not so certain that if you increase in dollars per barrel can show up those revenues, that can reduce that gap in deficit. So in budget surplus, I think we are still far from it for now.
Well, great insight from you there. But with this newfound optimism in the air with these high prices, talking about deficit, as you mentioned earlier, what investment can Nigeria make now to diversify its economy away from oil dependence? We'll talk about diversifying the economy over time. So there are concerns about the sustainability of high prices. How much longer do you think this is going to be sustained?
We live in a volatile market, and that volatility is not going away anytime soon. There is always the need to diversify the country's revenue base. Whether the prices are good, whether they are above $100 per barrel, the need for diversification becomes more urgent every day. And the reason is this: we have a time, a clock on oil revenues, all right? Even if we discovered more more reserves today. The issue is that with time, the demand for the product will wane and will fizzle out. When that happens, what do we do? So there is a need to diversify. That is not, it's not even a question. We need to diversify. Depending, being a monoproduct economy is quite risky. If the oil industry sneezes, Nigeria will catch cold, like as has happened several times in the past. So yes, we need to diversify, but however, that doesn't mean we cannot take advantage of the product today. All right, we have a large gas base. We still have a lot of crude oil reserves that we can benefit from. And I think one thing the country should do is to be able to attract the right investors. It's not as if we don't have the product. It's just that the environment to do this business is not that conducive. Apart from the security issues, there's also the fiscal regime that is now being questioned in terms of competitiveness. All right, we are not solely we don't hold the monopoly of crude oil reserves. We have countries on the East African wing of the continent that are now discovering crude oil reserves, and these countries are even much more closer to some of the markets, like the Asian market and perhaps even the European market. It depends on how you look at it. So there is the need to improve our competitiveness in terms of our crude oil industry. We need to attract the right investments, and that means enforcing some of the laws, regulations, and policies that we already have in place, trying to ensure that the industry is sanitized and clean, remove all leakages, all loopholes. The president released some executive orders, I think 2 weeks back, that talks about how they reduced the procedure for getting licenses and other issues regarding new entrants into the business. That is a good move. All right.
Just before I let you go, Mr. Okpalowa, I'd like you to speak more about the OPEC decision to sustain production cuts and the impact of that on the global oil market. And finally, I want you to give us your outlook and what promise the current surge of oil prices hold for Nigeria.
OPEC costs are going to be sustained, and it's OPEC plus, OPEC and other people like Russia. The costs are going to be sustained into the second quarter and also the third quarter of this year. I think that was the output from the last OPEC meeting that was conducted. So yes, that in the way it affects Nigeria, unless further caps are put over Nigeria, we should still be able to produce within the limits that has been allocated to Nigeria under OPEC. All right. Our major concern right now should be maximizing that limit, maximizing that cap. And then when we get to that point and we want to go beyond that, then we can now start being concerned of whether OPEC cuts will be limiting or not. But for now, what OPEC cuts generally have over the effect we have generally over Nigeria is the fact that presently the OPEC cuts are contributing to sustaining an elevated crude oil price globally. All right, and those are one of the factors that is affecting supply, and that is expected to continue over the next couple of months. All right, so that's the impact it will have on crude oil price. As for production, Nigeria just has to focus on maximizing its window under the crude oil production caps, and if we can do that, then we can now begin to discuss if we want to go beyond the cost, because every country now has to contribute to the production costs globally, every country under the OPEC plus arrangement.
Well, I think a good place to leave it. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Enibi Okpalowa, for coming on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, and that's our show this week. Thank you for watching. I am Frank Omalape.